In this interview, I talked to the godfather of yoga, Rodney Yee. He's been on Oprah and starred in more than 30 yoga DVDs, selling in their millions. But today, he's here with us to share his top tips for letting go of unnecessary stress in our lives. Enjoy the interview. Tell us the story of how you first discovered yoga.
That actually is still very clear in my mind. I was a ballet dancer, a physical therapy major, and a philosophy major at University of California, Berkeley, and a dancer with the Oakland Ballet. And my body, and not just my physical body, but my emotional body was very tied up. And I was looking for something constantly to open my body up, both physically and emotionally. And there was a yoga class right on top of where we would do dance rehearsals. And fortunately, it was the yoga room in Berkeley, and it was an Iyengar studio. A friend of mine who we used to quote unquote stretch after class, after ballet class all the time together because we were both tight. We said, the yogis are flexible, let's go upstairs. And I remember the first class I took was with Melinda Purley, who was an amazing teacher. And because we were dancers, we could sort of replicate the positions fairly easily. And because of that, I think it had a really strong effect. Like the archetypical aspects of the poses had their emotional, intellectual, physical effect very deeply from the first class. And I remember walking out of that first class and thinking, wow, what just happened? And, to be honest, Colleen and myself on a daily basis, we get that feeling of like, wow, this is magic. I mean, this is like a magic carpet ride into the unknown.
So how did that lead on to you actually becoming an instructor?
Well, my interest in yoga just kept on expanding. I went from taking dance class to yoga class. And when I was performing, I was basically doing yoga more than I was dance. And I started realizing what a potent practice it was. And it's not so much that I was addicted to it. It was almost like, why wouldn't I do this every day? Because of the effects of it. And so I decided to go to the Iyengar Institute in San Francisco in 1984 to further my studies, to take their advanced studies teacher training class. From that, I just kept on deepening my studies, and my friends actually started asking, well, what are you learning over there? Why don't you teach us? And they had corporate jobs, and they were sitting on their butt all day. And they were saying, hey, teach us a little bit about what you're learning. And so we used to empty the apartment out. And slowly, 3, 4, 5 friends would come over and I'd teach them yoga class. And then all of a sudden there were 18 people stuffed in the apartment. And so at that point, I just really launched my teaching career from sharing.
Well, talk me through the health benefits of yoga and how it actually works.
The health benefits of yoga are so encompassing. It's really, basically, it's almost better to ask what are not the health benefits of yoga, because really it brings the complete coordination between the mind and the body and the breath and the spirit. That coordination is, in some ways, maybe the actual definition of health. That in some ways we get disjointed and discoordinate, and also the natural rhythm of the mind, body, and the breath becomes discordant. And the yoga is this practice that is the union method. And one might ask, what is it uniting? In some ways, it's getting rid of the illusion that we're separate, that my mind is separate from my body, that I'm separate from the world, that this breath that we're taking in is not shared by everybody and everything, that this prana, this life force, is actually not the common thread that really is what is the essence of joining us all together. So in some ways, it's not the practice of creating something, but the practice of um, ridding ourselves of the illusion of actually things that are actually not happening. So it's really becoming cognizant of the truth of what is happening. So the health benefits because of that. I mean, psychologically, what are most of our problems is comes from the sense of isolation, from the sense of not being connected to or connected with. The same with our bodies. There's this strange emotional psychological effect on the body when it feels like it's separate and alone. Um, I remember an old psychology teacher said that the most necessary aspect of the human being is the need to belong. And the fact is we do belong. The fact is we are together. But so in some ways we're clearing the illusion that we're the illusion of our separateness. And that in itself, it seems like it is the most healthy thing to do, that it will bring balance. That doesn't mean you're going to live 200 years. That doesn't mean you're not going to live with pain. That doesn't mean you're not going to have difficulty in your life. But you're going to get rid of one of the main instigators of difficulty and instigators of suffering, and that is your idea of your isolation and your separateness.
What should people who start practicing yoga, what can they expect in the first initial weeks and months to experience?
I love when people first come into yoga class, and I love when they just get a taste of what I think I tasted in my first class, and that is, wow, here's a tool that can really help liberate me. And I feel like a lot of people keep sensing that this is a really important tool for them to fully be engaged in their life. And I think their bodies start feeling more at ease. I think their emotions begin to be more grounded. I think their intellect begins to be more keen. I think their attention begins to be more steady. All of these things, I think, happen. And I think at a certain point, people, we have a joke with fellow teachers that as soon as people come up to us and say, wow, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, we make a joke and say, well, we'll see them about 2 more classes and then they'll be gone. And then the person who hates it usually stays there for years. So it's funny. You have to, again, maybe be careful about what you wish for, because in some ways the yoga method, the union method, can really change your life. It's a tool for a revolutionary change. And sometimes people start tasting it and it tastes really good, and then they realize, wow, this might radically shift my life. And so I think at that point we see the disappearance of a lot of students, which, it all comes in time. There's no deadline here.
So what are the most common mistakes you see people make?
The biggest mistake in yoga, I feel like, is that people try too hard. There's not enough energy left for observation. There's not enough internalization of what the practice is doing. So I think that there's too much energy and temptation to try to master the external form. I believe that there is sacred geometry, so I think that the external form has a great deal of importance. But so far as the severity of the pose, of how deep you go into the asana, depth is not measured by how flexible your hamstring is or how far you can put your leg over your head. The depth of the pose is in the integration of the pose, because yoga doesn't mean to stretch. Yoga means to bring together, the union method. So in essence, when we're, as teachers, we should be not emphasizing contortionism. We should be emphasizing when someone has a true integration of the breath, the body, the mind, and the spirit. That's when we should say, wow, Angel, that's a good pose. That's a good pose when I see the integration taking place, not, oh, that's a good pose when I see some contortionary, extreme aspect of the human body.
What's your number one secret then that people can take away from this video and actually put into action straight away to improve their health and fitness?
The number one secret would be to ask yourself, what are you struggling with and why are you struggling? Is it possible to work without struggle? Is it possible to feel what you feel without struggling? Is it actually possible for you to be in the world, do what you need to do, and let go of the conflict, so that we're not always sort of in conflict with ourselves. We're not always struggling against and having a tug of war with ourselves. You can use your arms and your legs to further deepen your postures. But are you having a tug of war, or are you working in a way that there's a confluence? So there's a sense of, if you're rowing down a river, there's a sense of moving with the river, guiding yourself with the river, being in the flow of the river. So there's not feeling like, oh, I'm fighting the river all the time and I'm fighting myself.
Are there any yoga myths that you can debunk for us today?
There's so many yoga myths. First of all, that flexibility has anything to do with yoga. I mean, read any of the writings in yoga, maybe before the last 10 years, and you will not see the word stretch. The word stretch is not in the yoga vocabulary. Also, yoga's sort of a faddish exercise form, where it's true, it's amazing for the body, but to limit it to being an exercise form is to limit music into being noise. Music is just any noise. It's no, and yoga is not just poses.
And there's lots of different types of yoga. Can you actually describe the type of yoga that you actually practice and why it's special?
Well, I like Iyengar's answer. Everybody says there's Iyengar yoga, there's Hatha yoga, there's Ashtanga yoga, there's Kundalini yoga, and then there's all these different 1,000 million variations on each one of those main schools. But really, I mean, isn't that ironic? I mean, the word yoga is the union method, and then we're delineating all these different forms of yoga. In some ways, I feel like at this point I'm practicing yoga. I feel like there have been many beautiful doorways to get into this room of yoga. I mainly started with Iyengar yoga, which in some sense is a yoga that has incredible precision on alignment and sacred geometry of the body, which creates a perfect container for the breath to flow easy and for the mind to be steady. Hopefully I'm open-minded enough to listen to all the teachings that are coming down, almost like the Theosophists that were taking in all of the spiritual teachings of all the religions and asking, what is pertinent? What is working for me in this moment? What is my practice today? How does it differ from yesterday? Because I'm a different person, the world's a different place, we're in a unique point in time in every second. How do I navigate that present moment? It's almost like this. It's like a carpenter might have a tool bag, and as he or she goes along in life, you might collect more tools and you might learn more how to use those tools. So when you come upon a situation of you're trying to fix something, you ask yourself, what is the proper tool to use in this circumstance? As we go along in our yoga practice, we gain more tools. Those tools sometimes are obsolete for the moment, and sometimes they're the perfect tool. So as you get more wise in your practice, you figure out which tool you're going to use right now.
Is there anything that you do differently in your yoga practice now than when you first started?
My yoga practice is radically different than when I first started. When I first started, it was a very physical practice in the sense of wanting my body to open up, really desiring it to open up, for the joints to be more open, for the muscles to be more flexible. It was a strong physical goal. And now the yoga practice really is much more about synchronizing, really feeling how the breath moves the body and how the mind is gliding on the breath as the body moves. So it's much more trying to synchronize things, trying to find the natural rhythm of the body, and to let the asana practice enhance the natural rhythm. And again, sort of cleanse and get rid of the things that are impeding the natural rhythm. So it's not about creating the practice, it's about getting rid of the impediments that impede the natural flow from happening.
So for somebody who's a complete beginner, what's the most important thing that you'd recommend they do to make yoga become a habit?
Every day there's going to be a point in time where you actually want to turn inwards. It's just a natural thing. So you want to follow that power of that nature. So again, you're not struggling against yourself. You're like, I'm supposed to do this, this is good for me. Someone said this is good for me. I know I'm going to feel better, but oh God, do I really want to get to the mat? No, I mean, again, then it's just going to be a New Year's resolution that's going to end in 5 days. You know, what you want to do is set aside some time every day that you want to save for yourself. That you're like, you know, I deserve to take care of myself. I deserve to take care of myself. I deserve to have a little time with myself to feel where my inner body is, what my inner voice is. And these are just natural things. These are things that that if you really feel, there's already an inner pull that's going on. In fact, maybe it's the strongest force in your whole aliveness, is this, you know, it's almost like a horse going towards the barn. You know, there's a running towards the barn because it wants to go home. We all want to go home. So all you have to do is feel the natural current of wanting to return home. And once you begin to tap into this, there's no struggle of, so for the beginner, it's like, set aside some time that you get to be with yourself. And if you do a couple yoga poses, that's great, but set aside 15 minutes to start with a day. Probably the same time of the day is going to be the most beneficial. Set aside that time and do whatever you want there, you know? But you know, don't entertain yourself with a book or with a TV. Just be on your yoga mat and find out what happens.
Is there any advice that you can give people who have sort of broken the habit of doing yoga, how they can get back on track again?
It's asking themselves, I think, a philosophical question of, what do you want to do with this one precious life of yours? You know, what is going to really be valuable? You know, I mean, most of us brush our teeth at night because we know how it feels when we don't brush our teeth. Most of us eat when we're hungry because, you know, there is a natural impulse. There is a natural impulse to meditate. And again, ask yourself, why would you refuse to do something so delightful?
That's a brilliant way to end it. That's fantastic.
Great.
Rodney, you've given us some really inspiring content there, and I'm sure our viewers are going to get so much value from this. So thanks so much for spending time with us today, Rodney.
Not at all. Thank you, Angel.
Okay.